So, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues and friends, thank you for participation in today's most important celebration event. Before we start, I find it necessary to make a short announcement. I would like to draw your attention to our concept note circulated in advance. It indicates that today's commemorative event is meant to increase unity among the UN member states, and we are therefore looking forward to a fruitful, friendly, and respectful dialogue. In case a representative of a delegation wishes to take the floor after the co-hosts, please kindly indicate that in the chat, starting with the name of the country, followed by the name and position of the speaker. Having said this, with your permission, I would like to give the floor to my co-host, Ambassador Dang Dinh Huy of Vietnam. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dimitri. Excellency, friends and colleagues, thank you very much for participating in today's event to commemorate the 60th anniversary of one of the most important UN documents to many member states in Africa, Asia, Latin America, the Caribbean, and Oceania. That is the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and People adopted by General Assembly Resolution 1514 on December 14th, 1960s. Friends and colleagues, Vietnam's history of struggle for national liberation and independence, as well as history of becoming a UN member, are closely linked to that of other former colonized nations. In 1919, some 30 countries met in Paris Peace Conference to discuss the arrangement of the World War after World War I order. A young Vietnamese sent to the conference a document entitled Claims of the People of Annam, the name of Vietnam in the colonial period. The young Vietnamese became much more well-known later on, President Ho Chi Minh, who declared Vietnam independent in 1945. And in early 1946, Ho Chi Minh wrote letters to the president of the first section of the General Assembly and leaders of the P5, expressing Vietnam's wish to join the UN based on its values. Our struggle went on for 30 more years until Vietnam was reunified in 1975 and became an UN member at long last in 1977. I wish to emphasize that the path to decolonization and self-determination can be long and difficult, but all the more worthwhile. We have all achieved independence and self-determination because of our mutual support and solidarity, based on our commonality of colonial past and the strong aspiration of our people. Our Dien Bien Phu victory is therefore closely linked to the victory of many people in Africa. And during Vietnam's 30-year struggle, we received tremendous support of nations and people around the world, including many former colonized. Friends and colleagues, since creation of the UN 75 years ago, a great number of newly independent nations had emerged from their colonial past to join the organization and become advocates of decolonization and independence. The adoption of Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and People in 1960 was not only a reflection of this aspiration, but an encouragement for decolonization and self-determination. The Declaration and the national liberation movements gave impetus to other establishments, such as the birth of the non-aligned movement and the UN Special Committee on the Situation with regard to the implementation of the Declaration on the Granting of Independent and Colonial Country and People, C-24. The UN has been and need to continue playing an important supporting role in this process. We welcome progress that has been achieved since adoption of the Declaration, with more than 80 former colonials having gained their independence. But regrettably, the remaining 17 non-self-governing territories, home to nearly 2 million people, have yet to enjoy their equal rights or to be free to determine their own future. As we are verging on the first decade of decolonization, Vietnam continues to support the work of the UN and its institutions and agencies aimed at realizing the legitimate aspiration of the people in non-self-governing territory pursuant to Declaration on Granting of Independence to Colonial Country and People, the provision of the UN Charter and its relevant resolution, including Resolution 1514. At this meaningful 60th anniversary of the Declaration, we encourage all states to strengthen efforts to cooperate with the UN's respective body and relevant international organizations to step up efforts aimed at achieving full decolonization and implementation of the Declaration. May the spirit of mutual support and solidarity guide all efforts toward these ends. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear Kui. I would like to give the floor to my second co-host, DPR of South Africa, Xalisa Mabongo. Xalisa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dimitri, and good afternoon to all excellencies and colleagues. Excellencies, our leaders convened for a high-level meeting on 21 September this year to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the establishment of the United Nations. They reflected on the birth of the organization and its shared values of peace, justice, and dignity for all, and as highlighted in the Charter itself, to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. However, 75 years after the establishment of the UN, though this body has made some tremendous gains, many shortcomings still remain, as seen with those who have not yet obtained these common aspirations, which severely impedes their right to development. In stating the purpose of the UN, Article 1 of the Charter maintains that it is aimed at developing friendly relations amongst nations based on the respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples. It is therefore regrettable that the people of Western Sahara and Palestine and others are yet to exercise their right to self-determination 6 decades after the adoption of General Assembly Resolution 1514, a historic document which we gather here today to commemorate its 60th anniversary. This anniversary of the Declaration on Decolonization is a milestone which serves to remind us of the urgency and relevance of the instructive decisions our forebears took many years ago. It is this historic and instructive document, the Declaration on Decolonization, inspired by the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter, which galvanized global movement for independence of colonial territories, including in my own country, South Africa, and many others around the world. 60 years on, the United Nations can unequivocally proclaim that the Declaration on Decolonization has changed the world. Its implementation has freed some 750 million people, or 1/3 of the world's population at the time, from colonial occupation, drastically changed the political map of the world, and resulted in the establishment of over 80 new states in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Oceania. While it is true that the Declaration is one of the success stories of the UN thus far, in the 75 years of its existence, the decolonization process is not yet over. As we embark on the 4th international decade for the eradication of colonialism, we are faced with a mammoth task to assist as the United Nations in the decolonization process of the remaining 17 non-self-governing territories with a population of 1.6 million people who have not yet realized their inalienable right to self-determination and independence. South Africa attaches great importance to the issue of decolonization and fully commends the Special Committee on the implementation of the Declaration on the Granting of Independence on colonial countries and peoples for its work in addressing the plight of those who still live under the colonial domination and foreign occupation. The existence of colonialism and occupation in any form or manifestation, including economic exploitation, is inconsistent with both the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to colonial countries and peoples and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as stipulated in the Charter of the United Nations. Excellencies, South Africa seizes this opportunity to reaffirm our support for the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and the right to their independent and viable state of Palestine, with East Jerusalem as its capital, on the basis of relevant United Nations General Assembly and Security Council resolutions. It is a stain in the moral fiber and consciousness of the international community that Palestine and its people remain under illegal occupation and continue to be deprived of the shared values and ideals reaffirmed by all members during the commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the United Nations in September this year. In our own continent in Africa, the Sahrawi people in Western Sahara have not had the opportunity to exercise their right to self-determination, which is guaranteed under the Charter of the United Nations. The struggle of the people of Western Sahara is a struggle for self-determination, and our support for their cause is based on the principles of decolonization, promotion of human rights, international legality, and the stability and security of the African continent. We wish to reiterate at this point that South Africa support efforts to achieve a just, lasting, and mutually acceptable political solution, which will provide for the self-determination of the people of Western Sahara. All UN member states are aware that the primary mandate of MINUSO, as established in Security Council Resolution 690 and subsequent resolutions, is the holding of a free and fair referendum on self-determination for the people of Western Sahara. In this regard, we note the recent developments in Western Sahara and stress that this calls for the urgent need for the United Nations to facilitate the realization of the referendum to allow the Sahrawi people to exercise their inalienable right to self-determination in line with the mandate given to MONUSO almost 30 years ago. We further call for the United Nations to fully assume its responsibility for the protection of the human rights of the people of Western Sahara. We believe that any recognition of Western Sahara as part of Morocco is tantamount to recognizing illegality, as such recognition is incompatible with international law. Excellencies, we have achieved so much as the United Nations on the decolonization front, but much more still needs to be done. We look forward to your views and your perspectives on how we can work together to forge ahead with the implementation of this very important and historic declaration on decolonization. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Salisa. I will now make a statement on behalf of Russia. The year 2020 is truly remarkable. Not only we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the end of the World War II and the creation of the United Nations. December 14th marked an equally important date, the 60th anniversary of the Declaration on the granting of independence to colonial countries and peoples. This vital document gave a powerful impetus to the colonial territories' movement for independence, proclaimed the necessity of bringing colonialism to an unconditional end, and ultimately changed the world for good. Thanks to the declaration, 750 million people across the globe, or 1/3 of the world's population at the time, were freed from colonial oppression. The declaration became one of the most significant UN achievements, drastically changing the political landscape with the establishment of over 80 new states in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Oceania. But there is more to that. The unstoppable process of decolonization stimulated further positive transformations of the universal values. It is hard to overestimate the contribution of decolonization into the fight against racism, intolerance, and other various forms of inequality. We, the Russians, are proud of the fact that such a globally significant document was adopted at our initiative. Its draft was submitted for the consideration of the 15th session of the UN General Assembly by the Soviet delegation on September 23rd, 1960. Today we know it is a historic General Assembly Resolution 1514. Back then, since early 60s, the Soviet Union and then Russia unconditionally supported the striving of the states of all continents to free themselves and rendered them substantial practical assistance in shaping the foundation of statehood, developing national economies, and training civilian and military personnel. 60 years after, Russia is carrying on the decolonization process, including by actively contributing to the efforts of the UN Special Committee on Decolonization, C24.
Organized on the occasion of this.
And there is a lot of work ahead of us. Despite the fact that the majority of colonial territories have become independent, the decolonization process is far from being over, as there are at least 17 non-self-governing territories with a population of roughly 1.6 million people who have not yet exercised their inalienable right to self-determination. But the decolonization process would have long been accomplished if not for the remaining imperial logic of the former parent states, which apparently experienced difficulties parting with their possessions and beliefs in own exclusivity. For this very reason, many of our Western partners, some of them administering powers, keep coming up with the distorted interpretation of the fundamental norms and principles of international law and the UN Charter in an attempt to justify their ambitions. For that end, they sometimes resurrect dust-covered concepts from shameful past, like, for example, the infamous Monroe Doctrine. It is due to that strive for dominance that we witness numerous attempts to replace the UN Charter-based system of international law by concepts such as rules-based international order or alliances for multilateralism. Those are in fact nothing more than imposition of the so-called rules elaborated by a narrow group of states and adjusted on a case-by-case basis in substitution of universal principles, while the latter are being neglected. The long-standing historic desire to be more equal than others gave the world various forms of neo-colonialism, from trade wars to unilateral coercive measures, from double standards in recognition on governments to manipulation of human rights issues aimed solely at regime changes. Such approach has put our world in a situation when decolonization, bringing formal political independence, has not completely got rid of economic inequity, discrimination and suppression. Persistent and widening technological divide between North and South crippled economic prospects in many developing regions. Unequal trade relations inhibited productive diversification in many countries. I will not give you the details of how the contemporary neo-colonialism looks like. You all know it, and many developing countries have faced or are facing it, at least to some extent. I will just point out that the sorrowful legacy of colonialism is indeed still a heavy burden that slows down the development of the humanity. That is why UN decolonization activities remain highly relevant. We hope that in line with the Secretary General's vision and the recent UN reforms, all the pillars of the organization will continue in a coherent and mutually reinforcing manner to provide all-round assistance to the efforts to complete the decolonization process. We also hope that the UN member states, including the administering powers, will redouble their efforts towards attaining this goal as soon as possible. For our part, we are ready to continue doing our utmost to put an end to colonialism on our planet. We are therefore advocating for a reform of the Security Council that would correct historic injustice to African and other developing countries and increase their representation in this structure, dealing with the issues of peace and security. I thank you for your attention, and now I would like to give the floor to those representatives who would wish to make a statement. We encourage you to limit your interventions to 3 minutes. The first on my list is PR of Venezuela. Samuel, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. We express our appreciation to the delegations of the Russian Federation, South Africa, and Vietnam for convening this important event. Mr. President, the granting of independence and the realization of the right to self-determination of most non-self-governing territories represents a significant progress in the implementation of the principle and purposes of the enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. However, there is a pressing need to further intensify our efforts to put an end to colonialism in all its forms, which is why we call upon occupying and administering powers to participate in political negotiations in order to reach a just solutions to each of the outstanding questions. The Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, as one of the main sponsor states of the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples, is of the view that after 60 years, the international community is historically in debt with certain non-self-governing territories, which remain under foreign occupation and colonial or alien domination, and which have been denied for too many years their inalienable rights to self-determination, posing a clear obstacle to world peace and stability. Mr. President, we consider Puerto Rico to be a case of pending colonial domination that has been prolonged for over 100 years. The brotherly Puerto Rican people have been consistently denied from the full exercise of their human rights to self-determination and independence in their free and sovereign state. We strongly support Puerto Rico's right to freely choose its own political system. Moreover, in Venezuela, we also support a just and lasting settlement to the question of Western Sahara on the basis of a negotiated and mutually agreed solution as set out in relevant General Assembly and Security Council resolutions. The full implementation of MINURSO's mandate, including the organization and holding of a referendum, is as urgent as never before, which is why we reiterate the importance of appointing a new special representative of the Secretary General to reactivate the political process. A step towards that direction will serve to alleviate the suffering of the Sahrawi people and to ensure the maintenance of regional peace, security, and stability. In the same vein, we support all efforts aimed at reaching a just and lasting solution to the tragic situation in the state of Palestine. It is urgent to end the suffering of the Palestinian people and to allow them to fully exercise their right to self-determination and to exist as a free, independent, and sovereign nation on pre-1967 borders and with East Jerusalem as its capital. Therefore, we urge the parties to resume political negotiations without preconditions in order to realize the two-state solutions and respond to the plight of the refugees of Palestine and their right to return to their homeland. Mr. President, last but not least, we want to raise awareness of the ongoing attempts of recolonization being made by some states, which are intended to undermine the independence and sovereignty of our states and also to wipe out the right to self-determination of our peoples in flagrant violation of the UN Charter. We therefore urge the international community to advance in the effective defense of the Charter, to ensure the validity of Resolution 1514, and to redouble our efforts to conclude once and for all the pending processes of decolonization in the 17 non-self-governing territories, especially now as we embark in the 4th international decade for the eradication of colonialism. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to the PR of Iran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me congratulate the permanent mission of Russia, South Africa, and Vietnam for taking the initiative to organize this meeting. Mr. Chairman, the Charter of the United Nations provides that people of colonial countries are entitled to freely choose their political system and decide regarding their own future. Emphasizing the importance of this unambiguous provision, the Islamic Republic of Iran continues to stress that the issue of decolonization should remain one of the significant priorities of the United Nations. We share the view that the continued existence of colonialism in any form and manifestation is a violation of basic human rights and an obstacle to not only economic and social development, but also the well-being of all people as contained in the General Assembly Resolution 1514 of December 1960. We also endorse the relevant resolutions adopted by the General Assembly, including Resolution 1654 on the situation with regard to the implementation of the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples, and Resolution 1803 of December 1962 on permanent sovereignty over natural resources. This year marks the end of the 3rd international decade for the eradication of colonialism. However, despite the fact that more than 80 former colonies have exercised their right to self-determination, regrettably, we continue to witness the continuation of colonization, which causes the current populations of 17 non-self-governing territories to suffer from the scourge of colonialism. It is high time for the international community to actively engage in the process of decolonization in order to uproot colonialism in any form or manifestation, including political, social, cultural, and economic exploitation. It is necessary that the United Nations and relevant international organizations fulfill their responsibilities by taking effective measures to speed up the process of decolonization in accordance with the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples, subsequent relevant General Assembly resolutions, and the provisions of the UN Charter. The administering powers have the solemn obligation under the Charter to protect the human and natural resources of the non-self-governing territories against any possible abuse and avoid any activities that may adversely affect the environment, health, and economic development of the peoples of these territories. While attaching great importance to the work of the UN Special Committee on Decolonization, C24, in providing colonial countries and peoples with assistance that can enable them to exercise their right to self-determination, my delegation reiterates its commitment to continue to play its role in completing the mandate given to it as a member of C24 and spares no effort in helping the UN to successfully put an end to colonialism. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to the representative of Kenya.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to take this opportunity to express our appreciation to the delegations of Vietnam, South Africa, and the Russian Federation for convening this event. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on the 14th of December 1960, Resolution 1514 on the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples was adopted at the General Assembly. The resolution clearly articulates that all peoples have an inalienable right to complete freedom, the exercise of their sovereignty, and the integrity of their national territory. Hence, any alien suppression, domination, and exploitation constitutes a denial of their fundamental human rights. As we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the General Assembly, we take stock of the achievements of the United Nations that the United Nations has made in terms of decolonization and consider the challenges to completing the mandate of Resolution 1514. More than 80 former colonies, including my own country, Kenya, have gained independence since the birth of the United Nations. 17 still remain. Kenya's diplomacy is founded on the principle of the right to self-determination and stands in solidarity with all peoples of the 17 non-governing territories who continue to fight for the right to determine their destiny. We applaud the United Nations for its continuous efforts in consolidating gains and achievements against colonialism, imperialism, poverty, and exploitation of the vulnerable by the powerful while upholding human rights and human security. As we mark the last year of the third international decade to eradicate colonialism, we support the statement by the Secretary General that we must not forget that the peoples in those 17 territories are still waiting for the promise of self-government to be fulfilled in accordance with Chapter 11 of the United Nations Charter, the 1960 Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples, and relevant United Nations resolutions. And as we commemorate this historic resolution, Kenya calls for a renewed commitment to the question of the granting of independence to all self-non-governing territories, including finding effective solutions for Western Sahara and Palestine to exercise their inalienable right to self-determination. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like sincerely to express my gratitude and appreciation to the Permanent Mission of Russia, South Africa, and Vietnam for this initiative to mark the 60th anniversary of the Declaration of the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and People, a historic document that contributed to the independence of almost half of the membership of the United Nations and played a crucial role in shaping the world as we know today. Indeed, by adopting this declaration, the General Assembly of the United Nations not only further enshrine the right of self-determination as enunciated in the UN Charter, but has also defined its scope and the modalities for its realization for all the countries and people under colonial ruling. Would we not have been blessed if we were actually celebrating this anniversary while being able to say that we have undone colonialism and that we were no longer in need of another decade to eradicate it? Unfortunately, we are still living in a world where more than 1.6 million of people are subjected to foreign domination and denied their sovereign and human right to self-determination. Even worse, we are witnessing with much disbelief the prevalence of a mercantile mindset in the conduct of international relations in an attempt to undermine the erga omnes nature of this right by advancing a transactional logic of trading rights of people for political gains. This logic has encouraged the colonial power to embark on illegal action to change the status of territories legally or demographically, to hinder this right, and to impose fait accompli as realities. And though this behavior might be dangerous to the very fabric of international relations among states, it shouldn't deter anyone from the real and immutable nature of the struggle of peoples for self-determination. As a country that has fought for its freedom and for its independence, Algeria cannot fail to the obligation of lending continuous support to the people seeking their emancipation according to their own will, whether in Palestine or in Western Sahara. And in this vein, my country is supportive of a political and a peaceful settlement for the question of Western Sahara, which provide for the right of its people to self-determination. And we believe that the UN should continue to play a role, central role, in safeguarding the inalienable right of all the people which has not exercised this right of self-determination to preside over their destiny. As a custodian of the purposes and principle of its charter, the UN has the responsibility through its mechanism to undertake the necessary measures to speed up the full implementation of the 1960 declaration and stand strong in the face any attempts to deviate this process from its course. The General Assembly and the Security Council have to act not through half measures or perverted solution, but with the real hope, which is the exercise of their self-determination. To this end, the Special Committee on Decolonization, which played in the past a significant role in accompanying the people and the countries to fulfill their legitimate aspiration for freedom, has also to live up with all the moral, political, and legal means to its responsibility regarding the remaining 17 non-self-governing territory, and to revitalize its action beyond the declaration of new decades for the eradication of colonialism. In conclusion, and without taking further time, as we are celebrating the 75th anniversary, if the UN is to pursue its march for the future, it has to close definitely the chapter of colonialism and open a new page in which all the people could enjoy their freedom and no one is left behind. And I thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the representative of Egypt.
Thank you, Excellencies. I'd just like to check that the audio is working. Excellency? Hello?
Yes, I think it's working.
Good, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the outset, I would like to thank the PRs of Russian Federation, South Africa, and Vietnam. Thank you, Your Excellencies, for convening this meeting. I also take this opportunity to thank the panelists for their informative and insightful remarks. And we celebrate this year the 60th anniversary of the General Assembly resolution on the historic declaration on the granting of independence to colonial countries and peoples, which has solemnly proclaimed the necessity of bringing to a speedy and unconditional end colonialism in all of its forms and manifestation, and contributed in the independence of almost 86 countries worldwide. Mr. Chair, Egypt, along with dozens of other countries, has suffered from colonialism, which has allowed the colonialist powers to unjustly benefit and exploit their political and economic control over the colonized countries. This unjust situation was not acceptable to many of our countries, Egypt amongst them. And Egypt played a proactive role in the era of decolonization, gained immense role all across Africa and Asia as a champion of decolonization through its active engagement and support of liberating many countries. This support even included the use of radio transmissions from Cairo in the various native languages of Africa through the Voice of Africa station in order to help motivate various independence movements. Egypt also provided material support as well as its technical expertise to independence movements all across Africa, and through its political weight behind these independence movements, advocating for their cause in international fora and providing them with a safe haven of operation within Egypt itself, with a view to end foreign control and help eradicate colonialism. We have been, throughout history, a strong advocate on the efforts of decolonization, as well as to the rights of people for self-determination, since our participation in the very early efforts to spread the culture of peace and the role of the Third World in decolonization through the Bandung Conference in 1955, which helped on establishing the non-aligned movement in 1961. We believe that decolonization is an integrated process which requires national commitment and a comprehensive approach to address the real needs of the people of the non-self-governing territories. It is noteworthy as we celebrate this year the 75th anniversary of the United Nations and the 60th anniversary of the Declaration on the granting of independence to colonial countries and peoples, the struggle of our Palestinian brothers for independence and self-determination. Palestinian question remains one of the oldest items on the agenda of the United Nations, and Egypt hopes that the coming period will witness the reinitiation of the peace process and achieving the independence of the Palestinian state on pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital and according to international law, UN resolutions, and agreed upon parameters, Madrid Principles, the Arab Peace Initiative, and the Land for Peace Principle. Thank you, Excellencies.
I thank you very much. Now I would like to give the floor to the representative of China, and then I will also pass the chairmanship to my co-host from Vietnam after his speech. Representative of China, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Dimich. Thank you, ambassadors. First, I would like to thank Russia, South Africa, Vietnam to organize this important event. Colonies and non-self-governing territories are issues left by the Western colonial rule. It is a goal set out in the UN Charter to assist the colonies and their people in exercising the right of self-determination and striving for independence. Member states are making joint efforts towards that goal. This week, we marked the 60th anniversary of the UN Declaration on the granting of independence to colonial countries and peoples. The 75th session of UNGA adopted a resolution which declares the period 2021 to 2030 the fourth international decade for the eradication of colonialism. Decolonization remains an unfinished business. Today, there are still 2 million people living in 17 non-self-governing territories. Intricate and complex disputes from the colonial past have caused much suffering and long-standing problems for the local people, severely undermining local development and people's legitimate rights. The decolonization process still has a long way to go. China consistently supports the people of the non-self-governing territories in their struggle for the right of self-determination. We urge administering powers to take effective measures to ensure development of the local economy, society, culture, and education, and at the same time, protect local natural resources and the environment. It is imperative to stop militarizing these territories and to investigate and compensate for the disastrous consequences caused by nuclear testing, among others. China will continue to support and participate in the work of the Fourth Committee of the General Assembly and C24, and will, in close cooperation with other member states, push for more progress in decolonization with the ultimate goal of fulfilling the historic mission as set out in the UN Charter and the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to colonial countries and peoples. Thank you.
I thank the representative of China, and I now give the floor to the representative of Gambia.
Thank you very much, co-organizers. At the outset, allow me to thank the co-organizers, the missions of South Africa, Russian Federation, and Vietnam for this important commemorative event on the occasion of the 60th anniversary of the UN General Assembly Resolution 1514 and its declaration on the granting of independence to colonial countries and peoples. We commend the United Nations for its historic and long-standing decolonization efforts, which have immensely contributed to the independence of a significant number of member states, including my own. The United Nations itself became the biggest beneficiary of the independence movement, which led to an exponential increase in its membership, 192 today, including my own country. The Gambia supports the UN's efforts on the issue of solving territorial disputes, as such efforts contribute to the building and sustaining of peace around the world. In this connection, my delegation supports the ongoing political process initiated under the exclusive auspices of the Secretary General, which aims at achieving a realistic, predictable, enduring, and a compromise political solution to the Sahrawi regional dispute as recommended by the 17 resolutions of the UN Security Council since 2007. The Gambia believes that the question of the Sahara is one of territorial integrity and not of decolonization. It's a dispute that is being examined by the Security Council under Chapter 6 of the UN Charter concerning the peaceful settlement of disputes. Co-organizers, distinguished delegates, my delegation therefore fully supports the autonomy initiative within the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Morocco as the only compromise solution in this regional dispute. We believe that the initiative is in conformity with international law, the UN Charter, as well as relevant resolutions of the General Assembly and the UN Security Council. The decolonization agenda contributed immensely to the consolidation of peace around the world. And today we join you all in celebrating the 60th anniversary of this resolution, this landmark resolution and the declaration, by calling for more dialogue and compromise to solve political and territorial disputes. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Gambia, and I now give the floor to the representative of Nicaragua.
Thank you, Ambassador. First of all, we want to thank our distinguished ambassadors from Vietnam, Russia, South Africa, and for convening this important event. We believe that it is important to reaffirm our commitment to decolonization in this 75th anniversary of the United Nations as one of the greatest remaining challenges of the United Nations. It is important that in these times of pandemic and 5 years after the implementation of Agenda 2030, to adopt effective measures that consider the right to self-determination of the peoples in order to finally eradicate colonialism once and for all. Latin America and the Caribbean is a zone of peace as declared by CELAC, but still millions of our people live under the suffering of colonial oppressions. More than half of the list of non-self-governing territories are in our region, as also the colonial situation of Puerto Rico and the legitimate rights of sovereignty of Argentina in Las Malvinas, And as always, our solidarity to the Palestinian people in the achievement of the Palestinian state and our sisters and brothers of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic. Nicaragua, a country that fought for years for its national liberation, assumes and faithfully supports the struggle for national liberation of peoples and reiterates its firm commitment to the struggle against colonialism, for the self-determination of peoples and non-self-governing territories that have not yet achieved their self-determination and independence, and that still suffer the vestige of colonialism in all its forms and manifestations, as well as neo-colonialism with its neoliberal policies that are obstacles for the eradication of poverty and the implementation of the 2030 agenda. I thank you, Ambassador.
I thank the representative of Nicaragua, and I now give the floor to the representative of Cuba. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, colleagues. We thank the delegations of the Russian Federation, South Africa, and Vietnam for their initiative to convene this event to mark the 6th anniversary of the adoption of the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples, an anniversary that should not be overlooked. The declaration was the cornerstone of the process of decolonization, and 60 years later, it continues to be one of the most significant outcomes of the work of the United Nations throughout its existence. We cannot forget that when the United Nations was founded, many peoples, but particularly in Africa and Asia, were under cruel colonial rule. Adopting a definitive pronouncement on colonialism by the largest multilateral organization would entail a moral and ethical obligation. The enormous pressure exerted by the international community, the struggles already being waged by peoples under colonial oppression, the entry into the United Nations of countries that were breaking with their colonial past, and the very opinion of the colonial power contributed to these objectives. We will not be fair to history if the role played by the former Union of Soviet Socialist Republic was not recognized in this event. The initiative put forward by the then head of government, Nikita Khrushchev, to request the inclusion in the agenda of the 15th UN General Assembly, the item of the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples. The opposition of the colonial powers to this initiative was immediate. Very intense and complex were the negotiations, which resulted in a text that received several amendments before being approved by overwhelming majority. The Cuban revolutionary government, with only a few months in power, gave full support to this declaration, in line with its principal position against colonialism and in favor of the independence and self-determination of peoples. The approval of the declaration meant, without doubt, a victory of the anti-colonialist forces presented at the UN. Its contents imbibed from the most advanced ideas of the time, including the non-aligned movement founding principles, the non-Bandung principles. The declaration prompted new resolutions whose links of kinship with Resolution 1514 are clear. To wit, Resolution 1515 on the sovereign right of states to have at their disposal their own wealth and natural resources, and Resolution 1803 on the permanent sovereignty of states over their natural resources, among others. Today, 60 years after its and 75 years since the establishment of our organization, we recognize that considerable progress has been made, which is evidenced in more than 8 territories that have left their colonial past and are now members of the United Nations. However, it is disturbing that 6 years later, 17 colonial territories, euphemistically called non-self-governing territories, continue to exist. Palestine and the colonial case of Puerto Rico, which the United States masked under the wrong name of Free Associated States, adds up to these territories. In closing, We can reaffirm that the declaration fulfilled its legislative objective by resolutely promoting the end of colonialism. However, as long as a single territory remains under that status, the work of the organization will be on. I thank you, Chair.
I thank the representative of Cuba, and I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the outset, I wish to thank the missions of Russian Federation, South Africa, and Vietnam for organizing this side event to mark the 60th anniversary of an important UN declaration on the granting of independence to colonial countries and people. UNG Resolution 1514 was a landmark resolution that crystallized the principle of the right of self-determination. It called for immediate cessation of all armed action or repressive measures of all kinds directed against dependent peoples to enable them to exercise peacefully and freely their freedom of choice, which ultimately paved the way for independence of many nations across the world. Today, this declaration has become an epitome of freedom struggle from colonial oppression, alien domination, and foreign occupation, and has achieved an erga omnes nature. However, it is unfortunate that 60 years on, millions of people still living in the non-governing territories and under occupation in Palestine, in Kashmir, and other situations continue to yearn for their inalienable right to self-determination. The ongoing oppression of Kashmiris for the last 7 decades, especially since 5th of August 2019, is regrettable, illegal, and violation of the UN Charter and Security Council resolutions. The UN Secretary General himself, High Commissioner for Human Rights, and the UN machinery, especially the special rapporteurs, have frequently denounced measures and policies targeting the people's right to self-determination. The use of brute force, including naked military force, demographic changes amounting to genocide, extrajudicial killings, arbitrary arrests, enforced disappearances, curfews and lockdowns, communications and economic blackouts, and illegal settlements are outlawed under international law and are in violations of human rights and other related laws. These atrocities are well documented and are going on in plain sight of the international community. Another concern is using the canard of portraying the legitimate struggles, freedom struggles as terrorism. The misuse of counterterrorism laws is most rampant today in situations of foreign occupation and alien domination, including by discretionary legal tools to deny the right of self-determination through the imposition of digital and physical lockdowns and indefinite curfews. This use has been raised recently by UN Special Rapporteur on Protection of Human Rights while countering terrorism in her recent report to the General Assembly. Mr. Chairman, Pakistan has always remained a staunch supporter of decolonization and played a leading role in helping many countries in Africa and in Asia to get independence from the colonial powers. In furtherance of our efforts, we continue to promote the universal realization for the right of self-determination of all people living under alien domination and foreign occupation. Every year, we proudly table a resolution in the third committee. We are extremely grateful that the UN membership supports us by passing it with consensus. We hope other countries would join us with similar initiatives in support of the noble cause of the right of self-determination. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the representative of Pakistan, and I now give the floor to the representative of India.
Thank you, Chairman. Let me begin by thanking the missions of Russian Federation, South Africa, and Vietnam for organizing this timely commemoration. When the United Nations came into existence in 1945, more than 1/3 of humanity was located in non-self-governing territories under the yoke of colonial powers. As a former colony, India has always been in the forefront of the struggle against colonialism and apartheid since its own independence over 7 decades ago. India actively engaged in the organization of the historic Afro-Asian Conference at Bandung in 1955. 5 years later, we were among the first co-sponsors of the landmark 1960 Declaration on the granting of independence to colonial countries and peoples, which we are commemorating today. This declaration proclaimed the need to unconditionally end colonialism in all its forms and manifestations. In 1962, India was elected as the chair of the Decolonization Committee that was established to monitor the implementation of the declaration and make recommendations on its application. Since the creation of the United Nations, more than 80 former colonies have gained independence and have joined the UN family. As a result of sustained efforts by the UN membership, fewer than 2 million people live in non-self-governing territories under UN documentation. So while we have made good progress, our work is still not complete. The process of decolonization that began with India's own independence remains unfinished. This year, we commence the 4th International Decade for Eradication of Colonialism. The remaining 17 non-self-governing territories are in various stages of decolonization process on the agenda of the Special Political and Decolonization Committee. We need to step up our efforts to conclude this long-drawn process. The vigorous deliberations and active participation of all members of the Decolonization Committee indicates the seriousness with which the committee continues to strive for progress on this issue. This year, the work of the committee suffered a setback since the restrictions in place due to COVID-19 pandemic meant that the annual consultations and hearings with the representatives and stakeholders of non-self-governing territories could not take place. We hope that the C24 will find an innovative way to ensure that this important work continues in the coming year. India strongly believes that pursuing a pragmatic approach towards decolonization would surely lead to fulfillment of legitimate wishes of the people of the non-self-governing territories. The complex challenges facing the present world can only be met by coordinating our responses in the spirit of cooperation and collaboration. We must all strive to enhance cooperation with international agencies and actors and channelize the resources for the remaining non-self-governing territories. This would enable them to build capacities in their just and noble quest towards achieving their long-cherished goals. Before I conclude, Mr. Chairman, let me state that one delegation among us, which has a penchant for deviating from the subject deliberated upon, has again made unwarranted remarks not pertinent to the agenda on hand. Since the principle of self-determination, as considered on the agreed agenda of this committee, continues to be deliberately misinterpreted and misused by this delegation, it is pertinent to highlight once again that UN has established the principle of self-determination as a vehicle for the worthy cause of decolonization of the non-self-governing territories on the agenda of this committee, and not as a justification for undermining the territorial integrity of any member state. India remains committed to the objective of decolonization and offers her unstinting support to further accelerate the process. Thank you, Chairman.
I thank the representative of India, and I now invite representatives of Saudi Arabia. But before that, I would like to pass the chairmanship to my co-host, South Africa. Saudi Arabia, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the outset, my highest appreciation to your mission, Russian mission, and the South African mission for convening this very important meeting. I would like to stress the historical position of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to support the right of the people of Palestine. The Kingdom stands by the Palestinian people and supports all efforts aimed at reaching a just and comprehensive solution to the Palestinian cause that enables the Palestinian people to establish their independent state on the 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital. With regard to the Moroccan Sahara, we are, as an observer member in the C24, we express full support to the United Nations exclusive political process to achieve a just, lasting, and mutually acceptable political solution based on compromise to the Moroccan Sahara issue, as recommended by the resolution of Security Council, including resolution 2468. The question of Sahara is an issue for territorial integrity of Morocco and not for decolonization. Its regional disputes examined by the Security Council under the Chapter 6 of the United Nations Charter regarding the peaceful settlement of disputes. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia reaffirms its position in support of the autonomy initiative presented by the Kingdom of Morocco, which constitutes choice aimed at reaching a realistic and equitable solution. The Kingdom of Morocco has seriously and good faith contributed to the effort exerted under the support of the UN to find a permanent solution to Sahara issue. Thank you. Thank you.
I thank the Deputy Permanent Representative of Saudi Arabia. I now give the floor to the Permanent Representative of Argentina. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. First of all, we would like to express our appreciation to the Russian Federation, South Africa, and Vietnam for the timely organization of this event on occasion of the 60th anniversary of the adoption of the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples. The declaration is a true milestone in the process of decolonization. It proclaimed the necessity of bringing to a speedy and unconditional end colonialism in all its forms and manifestations, making it clear that there are more than one form of colonialism, and establishing two principles to address the several decolonization cases, which are the principle of self-determination of people living under colonial occupation and the principle of territorial integrity of member states. The anniversary is a good opportunity to reaffirm the crucial role played by the General Assembly and its Special Committee on Decolonization in supervising the implementation of the obligation of the administering powers, the necessary modalities to ensure that the decolonization processes are duly completed, as well as in the definition of in which cases it corresponds and how should be carried out the exercise of the self-determination of the people where appropriated. This role has been reaffirmed by the International Court of Justice in its advisory opinion on the legal consequences of the separation of the Chagos archipelago from Mauritius. The General Assembly has addressed the decolonization on the case by considering the specificities of each colonial territory. In that regard, it has upheld the right to self-determination of people under colonial domination every time it considers that principle applicable. Nevertheless, there are certain cases when the General Assembly has dispensed with the requirement of consulting the inhabitants of a given territory based either on the consideration that a certain population did not constitute a people entitled to self-determination, or on the conviction that a consultation was totally unnecessary in view of special circumstances. It is in defense of the self-determination of people that we cannot admit that this principle be distorted to such an extent as to force the argument in favor of the continued existence of anachronistic colonial situation which disrupt the territorial integrity of my country in contravention of paragraph 6 of the declaration. In that regard, on 16 December 1965, 55 years ago, the General Assembly adopted Resolution 2065, which characterized the question of the Malvinas Island as a special and particular colonial situation involving a sovereignty dispute between Argentina and the United Kingdom, which must be resolved through negotiation between both parties, taking into account the interests of the inhabitants of the island. Despite this strong message of the international community, which has been reiterated in several opportunities by the General Assembly, the C-24 and other international fora, the colonial occupation of the Malvinas, South Georgia, and South Sandwich Island, and the surrounding maritime areas remains unchanged due to the lack of political will of the administrative power to resume sovereignty negotiation with my countries. To conclude, when approaching to the beginning of the fourth international decade for the eradication of colonialism, we would like to reaffirm our commitment with the principles enshrined in the Declaration and with the obligation to actively seek the peaceful settlement of dispute. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the permanent representative of Argentina. I now give the floor to the permanent representative of Morocco. We have the floor, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Sir Co-Chair and dear brother. 60 years ago, the General Assembly adopted Resolution 1514, which took place in a particular context marked by worldwide movement for independence in the 50s and 60s. At the same time, this resolution consacred the sacrosanct principle of respect to territorial integrity of member states enshrined in United Nations Charter. Unfortunately, we regret that some reading of this resolution is suffering of ideological or selective reading. Indeed, this resolution is not only about self-determination, but also about territorial integrity and respect of unity and sovereignty of nations. In fact, paragraph 6 of the declaration stipulates that, and I quote, any attempt aimed at the partial or total disruption of the national unity and territorial integrity of a country is incompatible with the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations. End of quote. Even more, Article 7 of the declaration stressed that it should be implemented, and I quote, on the basis of equality, non-interference in the internal affairs of all states, and respect for the sovereign rights of all people and their territorial integrity. End of quote. Resolution 1514 should not be read in isolation as it's part of a full UN nomenclature. In fact, it was immediately followed the next day by Resolution 1541, which came to address the concern of states and avoid and discriminate use of some of the provisions of the resolution for 1514. In this regard, the resolution 1541 clearly determined in its principles for what a non-self-governing territory is stating. I quote, prima facie, there is an obligation to transmit information under Article 73 of the United Nations Charter in respect of a territory which is geographically separated and is distinct ethnically and or culturally from the country administrating it. End of quote. This clearly and legally means that territories which constitute a geographical continuation of a member state and are part of its ethnic and cultural components are not and cannot be considered a non-self-governing territory, but an integral part of a member state. As such, the General Assembly clearly determined that populations that do not fall within the parameters of Principle 4 are not subject to the provision of Article 73 of the United Nations Charter, and thus are not subject to the implementation of the right to self-determination as it related to Article 73. 10 years later, the General Assembly clearly adopted Resolution 2625, which constitutes the text that operationalized Resolution 1514. The Resolution 2625 reiterates the condemnation of secession, specifying that self-determination cannot be interpreted, and they quote, as authorizing or encouraging any action, whatever it may be, which would dismember or threaten totally or partially the territorial integrity or the political unity of any sovereign and independent state, end of quote. These three resolutions codified self-determination and provided clear and unambiguous safeguards in order to avoid narrow interpretation of self-determination and ensure that its implementation does not jeopardize the territorial integrity of states, nor does it dismember their territory. Indeed, the implementation of self-determination is framed by a fundamental principle, namely that of territorial integrity, which is inscribed in the United Nations Charter. Over the years, self-determination have evolved, both in its legal dimension and in UN practice, just like other principles and rights that have similarly developed over time. Such as 60 years after the adoption of 1514, we see that also in practice, the implementation of self-determination has seen major developments. Indeed, this principle has nowadays acquired the function of democratizing through autonomy, the nation states, free and fair election, so as to avoid balkanization and guarantee regional and international peace and stability. This is why it is essential to go beyond the limited and narrow-minded interpretation of self-determination and backward-looking independence ideologies dating to the Cold War era, and to open up to new forms of self-determination, which allow population to fully enjoy their rights and their developments and well-being. In this regard, autonomy, which is expressed through local democracy, economic participation, the preservation and promotion of tribal, linguistic, and cultural identities, makes it possible in several situations to go beyond the status quo, to cultivate peace, to get out of stagnation, and to foster trust and reconciliation. Such as Morocco has played a historical and active role in the decolonization of African continents. In fact, after obtained the independence of the major part of the country, Morocco supported the liberation of many sisterly countries in the continent. The Casablanca Conference, hosted by late His Majesty Mohammed V, with the participation of African leaders in 1961, was the prelude of the independence of many African countries and the creation of the Pan-African Organization of African Unity. Mr. President, I didn't want to mention any specific situation, but since some misused this celebration and instrumentalized it to spread falsities, to push fallacious narratives, and to try to change historic, political, legal, human, and geographical realities about the Moroccan Sahara, I would like to highlight briefly the following 6 points. I would like to say, first, the issue of the Moroccan Sahara is that of territorial integrity of Morocco and not of so-called decolonization. The decolonization of the Sahara is over through the negotiation of the Madrid Agreement since 1975 and its endorsement by General Assembly Resolution. 2, either they like it or not, a referendum is dead and definitively buried since 2 decades. Its death was declared by former UNSG, the late Kofi Annan, in his report to the to the Security Council, stating the impossibility to organize it. This declaration of the referendum was confirmed by an epitaph of the Security Council by banning all the reference to the referendum in all its 34 resolutions since 2001. 3, the political process is the only way to reach what the Security Council determined as a realistic, practical, enduring, and compromised political solution. 4, the only solution to the issue of the Moroccan Sahara is the autonomy initiative presented by Morocco in 2007 within the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Morocco, which had been already discussed in the last round table. 5, Moroccan Sahara region is registering the highest development rate in all the 12 regions of the Kingdom of Morocco in the region. Mega development projects are underway with more than $8 billion US. 6, the population of the Sahara elects democratically their representative in the Moroccan parliament and in the bodies of the region, who now manage their own affairs and rule the region. 7, as far as human rights, their protection and their promotion are recognized in all resolutions of the Security Council, which welcome Morocco's action and achievement in this regard. And finally, the Sahara has always been Moroccan. The Sahara is Moroccan now. The Sahara will remain Moroccan until the end of time. I thank you very much.
I thank the permanent representative of Morocco. I now give the floor to the representative of Timor-Leste. Sorry, the representative of Eritrea first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me? Dear colleagues.
Yes, we can hear you.
I would like to thank the delegations of South Africa, Russia, Vietnam for organizing this side event to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples, Resolution 1540. This declaration was a light of hope for millions of colonial people in Asia and Africa, and an inspiration for those who were struggling against the superior military and economic might of colonizers. As a nation that emerged from a long and bitter struggle for national independence, the right of people for self-determination and independence is deeply ingrained in the psyche of every Eritrean. 70 years ago, the General Assembly denied the Eritrean people their legitimate aspiration and right for independent nation, as it didn't serve the geopolitical interest of a superpower. Eritreans at home and abroad didn't give up, and through patriotism and sheer determination, Eritrea prevailed against all odds and regained its rightful place among independent nations. A lesson from our history is that no power can subvert the people's desire for self-rule, and that no peace can be achieved, no progress can be sustained without respect for sovereignty and political independence of every nation. We call on all administrating powers to take all necessary steps to fully implement the Declaration of Granting of Independence for colonial countries and peoples, and create the conditions that enables their people to exercise freely and without interference to their inalienable right to self-determination. We recognize the contribution of the United Nations in decolonization in the past 7 decades. We are, however, not oblivious of the fact that global economic, political, and cultural structures of the era of colonialism remain largely intact in many parts of the global south, especially in Africa. Many nations continue to be subjected to military and political pressures and cannot chart an independent political path. Decolonized nations in Africa are still chained by predatory global economic structure that keeps them poor while enriching the former colonies. Developing countries are facing relentless psychological onslaught against their culture and values that have been the source of harmony and peace for millennia. So as we commemorate this historic declaration, there is a need to recommit ourselves to end colonialism in all its forms and its manifestations. Our decolonizing task will not be fulfilled without addressing the conditions that keep developing nations on peripheries infringe on their sovereign right to chart their own paths and stifle their voice in multilateral forums. We should continue our struggle for a fairer, equitable, and just world. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the representative of Eritrea. I now give the floor to the representative of Timor-Leste.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead. We can hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excellencies, at the outset, my delegation would like to join other delegations to express our sincere appreciation to the permanent missions of the Russian Federation, the Republic of South Africa, and the Socialist Republic of Vietnam to the United Nations for hosting this event. Excellencies, the right of all people to self-determination, including the ability to pursue economic and social cultural development, the issue of decolonization have been at the core of the United Nations Charter. Ever since its foundation, the United Nations has taken its important role in helping us countries and peoples to exercise the right to self-determination and strive for independence, especially in the General Assembly adopted the historic declaration on the granting of independence to colonial countries and peoples to Resolution 1514, which we are celebrating today, which has then greatly accelerated the colonization process across the world. Who was listed as a non-self-governing territory and considered by the Special Political Colonization Committee, this important milestone has also brought us to our historic exercise to self-determination in 1999, leading to restoration of our independence in 2002. Therefore, we feel a strong responsibility to speak on the issue of decolonization, as we have learned that the continued existence of colonialism in its many forms is a violation of a basic human rights and an obstacle to the economic and social development and the well-being of the people. Excellencies, for Timor-Leste, the right to self-determination is a fundamental one, and it's enshrined in our constitution. Hence, it is our commitment to contribute to the realization of the rights of the people of the Western Sahara, as well as the rights of the people of the Palestinian people to freely become independent states and sovereign over their natural resources so as to ensure development and the well-being of their people. In the case of Western Sahara, with the view that the United Nations mission MINURSO has been present in the territory for 3 decades, but with no satisfactory progress, Timor-Leste calls on the full implementation of MINURSO's mandate to hold a referendum to allow the Saharan people to exercise their right to self-determination. Timor-Leste again urges the UN Secretary General to appoint a new special envoy as soon as possible to resume the talks between Morocco and the Frente Polisario with the participation of Algeria and the Mauritania. Meanwhile, with regards to the situation of Palestine, Timor-Leste supports two-state solution and continues to believe that a durable solution is possible only with the existence side by side of the state of Israel and the state of Palestine. We continue to urge dialogue and support all efforts that are based on the spirit of UN Charter and resolutions. Excellencies, the year 2020 marks the 75th anniversary of the foundation of the United Nations, and at the same time, the end of the third decade for adopted by the General Assembly on 20 January 2011. These two important events have given us an opportunity to further reflect on the implementation of the barrier we have adopted, achievement, as well as our collective challenge and what remains to be done in helping the people of the 17 non-self-governing territories to obtain their fundamental rights. Excellencies, as in the rest of the world, the COVID-19 pandemic has caused major economic and financial difficulties in the non-self-governing territories, most of which are small islands with small economy and located in remote areas.
I think we lost the representative of Timor-Leste. Maybe you can continue where you were. Can you please unmute, because we cannot hear you? I think you need to unmute your. Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. Excellencies, the year 2020 marks the 75th anniversary of the foundation of the United Nations. At the same time, the end of the third decade for the eradication of colonialism, adopted by the General Assembly on 20 January 2011. These two important moments have given us an opportunity to further reflect on the implementation of the various resolutions we have adopted, achievements attained, as well as our collective challenges, and what remains to be done in helping the people of the 17 non-self-governing territories to obtain their fundamental rights. Excellencies, as in the rest of the world, the COVID-19 pandemic has also caused major economic and financial difficulties in the non-self-governing territories, most of which are small islands with small economy and located in remote areas. This reality has a tremendous challenge to their limited capacity in terms of medical personnel and equipment. For those that are heavily depending on tourism as their source of income, the restriction of their borders to tourism has forced them to work even harder, in protecting their own economy while at the same time protecting the health and the safety of all by implementing measures recommended by the WHO. Thus, in addition to climate change, it seems important that this reality of the people of the non-self-governing territories is also well noted in the support of realization of their fundamental rights, including achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. To conclude, and as we near the end of the third decade of the eradication of colonialism, we wish to urge all members to redouble efforts to ensure that the situation of each of the least non-self-governing territories be considered on a case-by-case basis with a view to ensuring a just, a long-lasting political solution to all. I thank you. And I present my apologies for the technical problem.
I thank the representative of Timor-Leste. I now give the floor to the permanent representative of Ethiopia.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would like to begin by thanking the co-hosts, the Permanent Mission of the Russian Federation, the Republic of South Africa, the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, to the United Nations for organizing such an important webinar in commemoration of the 60th anniversary of UNGA Declaration on the granting of independence to colonial countries and peoples. Ethiopia is a country that has successfully curbed colonization. We also attach profound value to our effort to stand with our brothers and sisters in our continent in their days of struggle for independence. Declaration 1514 marked the overall consensus against colonization and foreign occupation. However, about 17 non-governing territories remained under colonialism. Even worse, the scourge of colonialism and colonial privilege is indeed we are yet to overcome. This shows, despite the remarkable moral ground and the independence of many states, actions remained short of our declaration. Beyond pursuing the self-determination of peoples, we need to reimagine independence and ensure sovereign existence of the nation states based on cooperation and free from foreign domination. Thankfully, our regional organization, the African Union, that was established in 1963, was with the prime objective of eradicating colonization, is now working to meet economic development and integration. Ethiopia, as a consistent proponent of the independence of all states and the cause against foreign domination, will continue to play its rightful role in addressing the scars of colonization that has caused an immense damaging effect on the overall progress of our societies and the social and economic development of our nations. I thank you, Chair, and our gratitude for the hostess of this webinar. My appreciation.
I thank the permanent representative of Ethiopia. I now give the floor to the permanent representative of Senegal. And after the permanent representative of Senegal, I will hand over the chair to my colleague, Anna from the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Chair. I hope you can hear me. Yeah, this is not the permanent representative of Senegal as an expert, but I thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor. I congratulate the mission of Vietnam, South Africa, and Russia for organizing this commemorative event about one of the most important agenda of the United Nations. Senegal is not a member of C24, but as observer, it raises its voice every year at the annual session of the committee to reiterate its attachment to the achievement of the best solution in the interest of the population of the territories still on the agenda. For us, the world needs to solve these issues and move forward to deal with new threats and challenges together. In that spirit, in particular in Africa, we support the autonomy initiative of Morocco for a peaceful settlement of the question of Sahara. We look forward to the nomination of the next special envoy of the Secretary General to continue the work begun by Mr. Horst Kohler and reinforce the process under the exclusive auspices of the United Nations Secretary General. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank a representative of Senegal for her statement. And now I give the floor to the representative of Indonesia. You have the floor.
Thank you, Excellencies. At the outset, allow me to join others in expressing our appreciation to Russia, South Africa, and Vietnam for convening this important meeting. Resolution 1514 was not only a monumental and landmark achievement in the 1960s, but also a testament to the will and hopes of colonized people everywhere, at the time in their struggle for independence from colonial domination. For Indonesia, the end of the Second World War brought the momentum for our long-sought independence, as it largely ended colonialism and stripped the dominion of colonial powers over their colonies. History shows, however, that neither the Bretton Woods Conference in Washington, D.C., nor the UN Conference on International Organization in San Francisco wanted to mention the subject of decolonization in the UN Charter. It is only in this light that the significance of Resolution 1514 can be appreciated. In our part, Indonesia hosted the Asia and African Conference in 1955, and with Asian and African brothers and sisters, it produces the 10 principles of the Bandung Conference, or Dasasila Bandung. The conference gave weight, confidence, and political platform to Asian and African nations, many of which attained independence in the conference aftermath. That spirit is now being carried on through the important work of the non-aligned movement. Excellencies, Resolution 1514 is also important as it gives and clarifies the content and scope of self-determination under the UN Charter in terms of the self-determination of peoples within the decolonization context. Moreover, it also provided the mandate and legitimacy to the Special Committee on Decolonization. As of today, there have been 3 international decades on the eradication of colonialism, and the 4th decade is on the way. There were 19 non-self-governing territories on the NSGT's list of the committee in 1988, the year when non-aligned movement tabled the resolution calling for the 1st decade. Unfortunately, over 30 years later, there are still 17 NSGTs on that list. To that end, Indonesia, together with the wider membership of the UN, will continue to contribute to the work of the Special Committee on Decolonization, which is currently led by the Ambassador Keisha Maguire of Grenada, in finding lasting and durable solutions to the remaining 17 NSGTs. We reaffirm our belief that each NSGT must be approached based on its unique situation, and not simply as a number on the list, or if one size fits all. the listing must be undertaken on a case-by-case basis. Excellencies, lastly, it would be remiss if we did not use this opportunity to reaffirm our support to the struggle of the Palestinian people for their meaningful independence based on the two-state vision and in accordance with the UN resolutions and internationally agreed parameters. Finally, my delegation would like again to congratulate the conveners for paying a deserved tribute to mark the 60th year of the adoption of Resolution 1514. I thank you, Chairs, Excellencies.
I thank the distinguished representative of Indonesia for his statement, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Gabon. Could you please unmute you? We cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Good.
Okay, thank you. Let me start by thanking the delegations of the Russian Federation, South Africa, and Vietnam for hosting this very important event devoted to the commemoration of the 60th anniversary of the Resolution 1514, also known as the Declaration of Decolonization. It is widely agreed today that the Declaration of Decolonization is one of the most significant UN achievements over its 75 years of existence. Indeed, Resolution 1514 led to a worldwide movement towards the independence of many countries across the world: Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Oceania. Nevertheless, our goal to eliminate colonialism is not over. The international community must pursue its efforts in order to grant independence to the remaining territories. Regarding the issue of Moroccan Sahara, my delegation is of the view that the latter has nothing to do with decolonization. It is rather an issue of territorial integrity of Morocco. Indeed, we believe that it is indeed a regional dispute that is being examined by the Security Council under Chapter 6. In this regard, Gabon fully supports the ongoing political process held under the authority of the Secretary General of the United Nations. The goal of this process is to achieve a pragmatic and realistic compromise solution to this dispute, as recommended by the 17 resolutions of the Security Council since 2007. We also support the autonomy initiative within the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Morocco as the only compromise solution. This initiative is in accordance with international law, the UN Charter, as well as the relevant General Assembly and Security Council resolution. I thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the representative of Namibia.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much for giving me the floor. I would like to thank you and our distinguished colleagues from South Africa and Vietnam for convening this important meeting to bring into focus how far we have come over the last 60 years in implementation of that landmark UN Resolution 1514 and the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples. This is a resolution that holds special meaning to my country, as I am sure it does to all of us here today. It is to the credit of the United Nations, the international community of nations, and the strong solidarity and support amongst us all to end colonialism and to celebrate humanity's capacity to embrace and reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, the dignity and worth of the human person, and respect for the principles of equal rights, self-determination, and freedom of all peoples, that my country, Namibia, is today a proud and independent nation and a member of this, our united family of nations. Yes, we have made so much progress over the years, but it is deeply disappointing that there still remain a few peoples around the globe for whom this ultimate realization of their inalienable rights has not yet materialized. We are in the 21st century, in a time where we look to the next frontiers of civilization, and at a time when we as United Nations have committed ourselves to a respectable commitment that no one should be left behind. And yet, we still have no less than 17 non-self-governing territories still waiting out in the cold. Like many others who have spoken here today, Namibia is concerned about the current developments which are putting into jeopardy the inalienable rights to self-determination, freedom and independence of the Palestinian people and of the people of the Western Sahara. In the case of the Western Sahara, there is no ambiguity in Resolution 690. Operative paragraph 2 of the resolution calls for the organization of a referendum of the people of the Western Sahara. That is the reason why we have the UN mission for the referendum in Western Sahara, MINURSO, there now for more than 30 years. If we are now told that the referendum is dead and buried, then surely we must answer what the purpose of this mission is and why we, the United Nations, maintain this mission there. So, President, Namibia is a peace-loving country whose independence was achieved through the multilateral efforts of various countries through the United Nations. Therefore, Namibia is urging that serious attention be accorded to finding mutually acceptable and peaceful resolution to the outstanding cases of all 17 non-self-governing territories. We call the international community's attention to the cases where signs for the resumption of military hostilities have been observed. Future generations will judge us all if we fail to take corresponding actions to safeguard the UN Charter, the principles and values contained therein, by resolving these issues amicably. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I now give the floor to the representative of Eswatini.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You can hear me? Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We also express our appreciation to you for convening this commemorative event. And as we celebrate the 60th anniversary of General Assembly 1514 on the granting of independence to colonial countries and peoples, we acknowledge the need to do more in this regard in order to fulfill the universal principle enshrined in the Charter, that is the right to self-determination. The Kingdom of Eswatini supports all initiatives aimed at ending decolonization. However, insofar as the issue of Sahara is concerned, we are of the view that it is an issue bordering on the territorial integrity of Morocco and not of decolonization per se. It is a regional dispute examined by the Security Council under Chapter 6 of the UN Charter regarding the peaceful settlement of disputes. In this regard, we support the ongoing political process held under the exclusive auspices of the UN Secretary General, aiming at achieving a realistic, practical, achieving a realistic and practical compromise situation to this dispute. We further support the autonomy initiative within the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Morocco as the only compromise solution. This initiative is in conformity with international law, the UN Charter, as well as the General Assembly and Security Council resolutions. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. There are no more speakers inscribed on my list. With your permission, I would like to give the floor to my co-host, Xolisa, to make some short closing remarks. Xolisa?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dimitri, and thank you very much, Ambassador Dang Kay of Vietnam, for co-hosting this meeting with us. And we thank all the delegations who took part. This was a very rich and most welcome discussion that we had. We urge the UN and its member states to redouble efforts in the implementation of the Declaration on Decolonization so that the remaining colonial territories of the world can enjoy self-determination and independence. We commend the Special Committee on Decolonization, as well as all UN bodies dealing with the matter, to redouble their efforts and work to advance these important objectives. We also believe that the further implementation of the Declaration will contribute to the realization of the three main pillars of the work of the UN: peace and security, development, and human rights. Furthermore, and in conclusion, we believe that effective and full implementation of the Declaration will contribute to ensuring that no one is left behind as we embark on the decade of action towards the implementation of Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. Once again, South Africa is very grateful to all those delegations that took part this afternoon. And we again thank our co-hosts, the Russian Federation and Vietnam. I thank you, Dimitri.
Thank you very much, Xolisa. Thank you, Ambassador Kui. I would like to thank you, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues and friends, especially those of you who took the floor to express support to the decolonization process. In my view, our today's discussion proved once again that the scars of the colonial past are still fresh. While many of the goals are yet to be accomplished in order to restore justice and equity, the new challenges emerge. There are raising concerns about possible new phase of the same old dominance logic, this time in the sphere of economy and fair trade. Today, when the United Nations are about to enter into the fourth international decade for eradication of colonialism, our main lesson learned throughout these last 60 years should be not to forget the real root causes of some of the most challenging problems. That is why it is necessary to completely turn the page of the tragic colonial period and fight the neo-colonial practices. We, the UN member states, should reconfirm our commitment to the just cause of decolonization, while the UN Secretariat should exercise the coherent approach and engage all the pillars of the organization in order to speed up the end of colonialism. I thank you all, wish you a good evening, and thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
Yes, thank you very much.